There may never have been a more uncertain time to be a farmer. Environments are changing, driven by climatic hazards that interact with ever-present production constraints to create challenges to increasing, or in many cases even maintaining, current agricultural productivity. To address this, more and more solutions have been proposed to help farmers, but such has been the proliferation that it can be hard to understand where investments can generate the highest benefits. More and more, we can fall into the trap of pushing forward with existing beliefs and assumptions without stopping to consider a wide array of different possible solutions for a given location. The PAiCE framework, short for Prioritising Agronomy in Changing Environments, is a collaboration between Australia's National Science Agency, CSIRO, Cornell University, and the CGIAR Excellence in Agronomy 2030 program. It aims to help decision makers understand the different opportunities that can help address both climate hazards and production constraints in a target agroecology. It does this in a participatory workshop setting with decision makers who have come together to discuss how to address the key challenges to a location that inhibit maintaining and improving agricultural productivity. Through communal learning, a target agroecology is framed in terms of the system, climate hazards or production constraints, and adaptation options. At the end, the group will have a prioritised set of investment options that highlight the value proposition and feasibility of different potential solutions. In this way, a clearer picture can be formed to understand the highest value, most feasible, and most inclusive pathways to prioritise investments in agronomy in a changing environment.
Welcome to PAiCE Training. The PAiCE tool is not something that's overly technical, and you don't require specialist skills to use the tool. The training that we're going to give is designed to help you understand the questions and how the tool works so that you can facilitate that workshop and make sure that you can answer any tough questions that come your way. As such, what we're trying to do here is for both process and technical facilitators to be aware about the purpose of the tool, the definitions and the questions of the tool, and what you can do with the tool. This training is going to be delivered over 4 weeks, starting with this module, the first module of training that covers module 1 of the tool. Alongside this video set, we're providing you with a clean template of the pre-module and module 1 to fill in so that you can play and learn with the tool as we go. Subsequent weeks, we'll be providing the next videos and next modules to complete until we get to the end where you'll have played with the tool in its entirety to see what it can do. You'll be familiar with it. Each week after you've done the homework and returned it, we're going to have a training session together where we can come together and discuss and ask any questions, identify any problems, follow up any definitions that we are having trouble with. So the requirements for this week are to watch this video set and complete the pre-module and module 1 template that we're sending for each workshop that you're going to do. Return that to me by August 1 at the latest. And on August 2, we will have a learning session together that shouldn't go for very long, but there'll be 2 hours put aside in case we need it. And next week, we'll then be supplied with module 2 videos and files to work through and play with. So to engage through this process of training, we have our core sessions, but we also have the ability to comment on each of the submodule pages that we have. So in order to do that, we've got this questions and comments box. So if you're watching this within the PowerPoint itself, what you need to do is to go and grab a text box from the drawing here, put your initials, and then write a comment. That way everybody can see it. What we will then do is, as we move through, if you've got the same comment or if you want to see the answers to that, we can then add comments to that, and I can reply here and send it off. And people can then comment under that in order to create a conversation around the different elements that are coming. So all you need to do is on your home page, grab a text box, type a comment and preferably your initials before, and then we can go from there in order to engage with each other. As a quick overview, the PAiCE framework has 4 modules. The first one is preparation, where we just enter the details of the workshop to be had. The first module then is around identifying the key crops and the extent of key crops and their performance. The second module is the key climate hazards that affect an area. And the third module looks at the adaptation options that relate to these key crops and key climate hazards. Each week we're going to cover a new module. So this week we're covering module P and module 1, and then each subsequent week we'll cover modules 2 and 3. It's also important to note that modules P, 1 and 2 are all done before the workshop. So you're going to have some assistance from some of the global team in putting that together, but module 3 is essentially the workshop module.
This is the landing page for the PAiCE Climate Adaptation Framework, module P1. There's 3 things that you need to know about this page. The first one is that when you go to enter into the tool where you're not meant to, you'll be told that it's not possible to enter there. So that avoids errors in data entry. The second thing is that you'll see that currently the tool is set up for 2 languages, English and Spanish. When you change the language, what you'll see is that the whole tool interface will change to that language. So if you'd like to put the tool into a language that's not English or Spanish, please let me know. It's something that we can do by providing you with the translation pages. And the third point is that you'll see here, click here to progress to something. So when you click that, that will push you on to the next page. So that's how you are guided between the different modules. In module P2, this is the user guide. So this is essentially telling us the interface that you're working with. So any black box you see is a heading, any orange is a section break, and any blue is a question posed that needs answering. The white box is either some text, some information, or an auto calculation. And you'll see that sometimes colors come in with color codings, rankings, results, and everything else. But the key thing to look at as you move through the tool is these boxes that are yellow with red and these 2 arrows each side. This means that it's something that needs answering for you to progress. And what you'll see, once you enter into that box, it will change color. It will go orange if it's numerical, or it will go that yellow if it's text entry. So wherever you see these yellow boxes with red input, with red text, and the greater than and less than symbols around it, it's where you need to put data in. The final thing for the user to know is that you will need to zoom in and out because we can't set it up knowing what screen resolution that you'll be on. So you may need to use down in the bottom right corner, the zoom function to make sure that it fits on your projector on your screen. As always, then you click down the bottom to click through to the next page, the next module. The next tab is module P3, and this is around some important user notes. So just taking you through some key things that you need to know. So for instance, the modules 1 and 2 that are part of this tool are actually pre-populated and pre-filled before the workshop. And we suggest that you use the best available data or expert and evidence-informed estimates. So sometimes you're not going to be able to get exact numbers. You're going to have to make a few informed guesses to make that work. But it's impossible to make a tool that will work in every location, in every agroecology across the globe. So we've set it to these key things, and if you can't get exact data, then you'll need to use expert inputs and evidence as best you can to populate those numbers. The second thing is backtracking. So what's really important is that throughout the tool, there are some points where if you go back in the tool and change something, the whole tool recalculates. So we've got some points there that say that if you backtrack after this, you're going to have to check everything that you put through. So you'll see those points as you go, but it's really important that as you're entering data, before you move from module to module, make sure that you're happy with that, because it could cost you a lot of time and effort to backtrack to the start if you need to change some numbers. And the final one there is if you're having any issues with the tool, you've got some contact details, be it with myself at CSIRO or with Andy McDonald at Cornell University. As always then, click here to progress. So this is module P4, and this is about setting the geographic scope of the PAiCE workshop. And this is a really, really important element to make sure that we get right, because everything we do in the workshop has to be related to this geographical scope that we're talking about. So we talked before about having these yellow boxes with red text. So we can see here how the tool works. There's no further questions yet because it's tiered so that when you answer a question, new questions will emerge. So what is the global zone? What global zone does this workshop cover from the drop-down menu? You'll see if it's a drop-down menu, it'll have this little arrow down to pick. So I'm just going to fill an example from Southern Africa. So we would choose Africa. As we choose Africa, okay, what region does this workshop cover? Again, it's a drop-down menu. In our example, we're going to do Southern Africa. What production domain does the workshop cover? So when we talk about production domain, we're running workshops where the system is similar. So it means that if you've got dominant crops, dominant systems that are common throughout a specific area, that's what we mean when we talk about production domain. So in this case, we're going to work in the maize zone in the Chinyanga Triangle of Southern Africa. So we have the basic elements of our location here. So when you've done that, you'll see that the geographical scope heading will come up here. So this is the location that will be used throughout the rest of the workshop. But just so that we're clear and so that we can come back and do some calculations, we just need a few more details. So what we've got is the approximate cardinal points. Now, these will never be perfect, but if we were going to look on a map, what would be the 4 furthest points that would be a part of this location? So just as an example, what we've got then is Kasungu, Dedza, Angonia, and Katete. And then what we can do is just go to Google Maps to put them in and just create an approximate map that will come out. So just so that there's clarity on the area that we're talking about. And then comes the details. So over here, the number of countries involved between 1 and 6. So what you'll see is it will depend on how many countries you put in as to what you have to fill. But in this case, we're covering locations in 3 different countries, and they are Malawi, Zambia, and Mozambique. So there's the country names there. And then the subnational areas. So we're doing this just so if we want to go and create shape files or anything else, it's really clear the area that we're covering. So in this case, in Malawi, what we're looking at is the central and southern regions. And when we talk about subnational, that's different country to country. So there's no common language there. But what we're trying to do is when you think about shape files and the levels of shape files, having an understanding of what levels are there. So it's just tier 2 and tier 3. So they might be called provinces, states, you know, whatever it is that's in those countries. So what we're then doing is putting the details in so that if we have to go and get shape files, we can do that. So what we have then is you'll see that currently there's still one box that requires inputs. So it's telling us, please complete the above before progressing. But what will happen is when we do eventually fill all of the yellow boxes, that will change. What we'll see is that that warning will change and it will allow us to progress down here. So click through. While we're going though, if you have any workshop notes that you'd like to discuss, maybe there was districts that you did or didn't include and just some notes as to why. So it just helps to understand and contextualize the actual area that we're talking about. But this is this module is really important because everything we do after this comes back to this zone that we're talking about. So take the time, make sure the people that you're working with understand the exact zone that you're talking about, because the tool will not work if you start talking about outside of that zone that the workshop will talk about. As always then, click through to the next module.
This is the landing page for module 1. So what you'll see at the moment is that it's blank and it's got this message that says complete all inputs in prior modules to proceed. So whenever you see this, it means that you need to go back and find the yellow box that's not being completed. So in this case, if we fill that in and then we progress, it will emerge. So this is the landing page for module 1. It's telling us about what we're trying to achieve here. The key things to remember here are that this is pre-populated prior to the workshop. So this is something that our global teams are going to help you put together, and then you will need to truth and adapt, look where there's missing data and other things. The purpose here is to characterize the cropping system, and what you get at the end is rankings of the relative economic importance of the key crops in this location. To do that, we go through 6 modules. That's identification of the crops, the area under each crop, the yield, income and gross margin of those crops, and then the final output. As always, click down the bottom to progress. In module 1.1, what we're looking at is to simply identify the key crops that we'd like to consider within the workshop. So if you're looking at a whole of systems approach, you'll do all the crops, but sometimes we want to focus on particular crops through the workshop as well, and the tool is set up for that. So it accepts between 1 and 8 crops, always remembering, and this will be at the top of each module, that we're focusing on a specific region that we're considering. So the first yellow box with red text that we have is this number of crops, how many field crops. So when we come in here, what we can do is type 1, for instance, and it will show us that we need 1 crop names. Or if we go 5. If we were to go 9, what we'll see is that it tells us that it must be between 1 and 8. In this example, let's just go with 8 crops. So 8 different names will emerge. What we can then do is select the 8 crops that we want to discuss, put them in. If we have any workshop notes, for instance, there was crops 9 and 10, but we didn't consider them, or we had this discussion on if a particular crop should be involved, just drop in those workshop notes there, so that if you ever need to go back or redo anything, you've got some notes there. And of course, then click to proceed. This is module 1.2, where we're essentially looking to understand the extent of the different crops that we identified in module 1 by 1, remembering that we're always talking about this specific area that we have. The first question that we have is how many seasons we need to consider. So that's between 1 and 3. So again, if we can put any number in, and the tool will change as we adapt. The really important point here, though, is this next question around the production area in hectare. And that's because we're talking about a defined area, and the tool calculates based on the hectares. So as an example, again, I'm putting in junk data, but essentially what we have is a specific number of hectares that we're talking about. So as before, if we put in 4 seasons, the tool will say, no, you can only do between 1 and 3 seasons. If we do 1, then it will ask for 1 season. So again, you might only want to focus on a particular season for this tool, and we can do that. In this case, let's go with 2, and because we're in Southern Africa, it's asking us for the name of those 2 seasons. So cool and hot, but in South Asia, for instance, it might be Rabi and pre-Kharif and Kharif season. So it's whatever those seasons are known as. So then what we're looking at is simply to put the percentage area of that in this case, 250,000 hectares across the crops, and then fallow and remaining. So for instance, what we can do, let's just say that there is a dominant crop here in maize in the cool season. Again, this is all junk data. So it's asking us to fill in those boxes. And then what we've got, is the percentage that comes in across the cool season of these different crops. So a few things that we can then look at here, the way that it's set up. So let's just say that this is only 80% in and 90%, so it's only summing to 88%, saying in the cool season, there's more than 10% of crops under other crops down here, so 12% remaining crops. So please add additional crops to ensure they are considered. So if we were to do that, for instance, what we could do, come back, change this to 8 crops, put in another crop, and then it's asking us here, and then let's just say 5%, and now we're not getting an error message. What we can then do is to go across and put in our second crop. And then we've got what we came for here, and we can move on. Let's just get a bit more diversity here though, to look at here. The thing that's important here though is this is one of those points where if you need to return and change numbers, then everything you do subsequent in the tool changes because of the way the formulas work. So make sure at this point that you're happy with what's in there, because it can be really time consuming to come back and redo that. And there'll be points throughout the tool that come up with this warning that say, make sure that you're happy with where you are right now, because it's really time consuming to backtrack from this point. One of the other things that a lot of questioning has come from is around how to deal with perennials that have a ongoing presence, and that's built into the tool. So remembering that we're talking about a set number of hectares. For instance, we've got fallow in here as well in T, so it always sums to that 250,000 hectare. So let's say for T, for example, it covers 5% of the area in both seasons, sorry. So it's a perennial, it's a consistent land area that comes. So there's no issue in the tool around how you would factor in perennials as part of land area. Module 3 then looks at the current yield of these key crops that we've identified in the earlier modules. So we need to define the average yield for each crop over this domain in the last 5 years. Remembering we're talking about this specific area. And yes, it's an average across that whole area, so there is going to be diversity, but the way the tool works, we need to define an average across the whole domain or agroecology that we're talking about. And we do that by the different crops and then by the seasons, because that will change a little bit as well. So we can plug all these in, and then again, I'm just putting in junk data, so don't be too concerned about that. But once we've filled all the yellow boxes, if we put in any notes that we need to note there, and then we come down and proceed. Module 1.4 is similar to 1.3 and indeed 1.5. What we're talking about here instead of yield is the income that comes from each of the key crops. And we're talking about per ton produced. So we've just put in the tonnage, the yield. So it's a simple calculation on the US dollar amount that comes through this. And we're using US dollars because this is a global tool and we want to compare back in a standard currency. So once we pop them in, we pop in any notes around variability or other things that come through so that we can always return, and then we continue on. Module 1.5 is similar to 1.3 and 1.4, except now we're talking about gross margin on a hectare basis. So the average gross margin across the domain. And again, we do this just so that we've got an understanding of some things can provide great income, but they're also very expensive to use as well. So what we do then is to pop in our numbers. Pop in any workshop notes, and then we're onward to our results. Now that we've completed the inputs to Module 1, we get some results. So what we're seeing here is the relative economic importance of key crops in the target domain, remembering that this is all junk data at this point. What you're going to see is that some crops will have a relative economic importance quite a lot higher than others. So in this case, maize in the cool season is the crop that comes out as the most important by a long way. And what we'll see is if we backtrack through here, we'll see that in the cool season, maize is 85% of land area. In terms of yield, it's got relatively okay yield here. And then in terms of the income that comes from it, what we'll see is that it's got a relatively high relative income per ton as well. So what we see then is that's why it's coming out there. So the idea here is just to get an understanding of the relative importance of the different crops as we go forward in that prioritization process, so that we can start to understand investing in priority crops rather than investing in crops that don't have a lot of relative economic importance that comes through. You can also go back and look at the calculations as to how we got to this this result at the moment. So showing the actual inputs that you put in, the US dollar values that come through, and the sorting that comes through, and you can look at it by season as well. So that you can understand how you got there. And then what happens is you click through, that's Module 1 done, and you progress on to Module 2. So our next steps moving forward are that you've been provided a clean template. You need to download that template, change the file name to the location and your name, and then fill it out and have a play. It doesn't have to be perfect numbers. These are just as you estimate them. The primary purpose here is to make sure you understand how the tool works. You need to then return it to me via email via the 1st of August, and then attend the group discussion on the 2nd of August. Look forward to seeing you there.